It's not about lowering your standards. It's about understanding what the standard is for that moment.
Just because you can does not mean you should.
I say it all the time. Leadership and entrepreneurship is where overachievers go to fail 99% of the time. Make sure you take those small wins along the way. And that small win could be as simple as, I made time for a run today, because that gave me the space on it.
I'm Dr. Amy Athey. As a licensed psychologist and performance expert, working with elite athletes, C-suite executives, and high performers operating in some of the most demanding environments, I've seen what it truly takes to perform when it matters most. From supporting members of the Naval Special Warfare community to advising leaders in high-stakes, high-pressure situations, one truth remains consistent. The tools that drive performance are the same. You prepare in a way that allows you to show up ready when the moment arrives. Each week, I'll share practical tools and insights to help you strengthen how you think, lead, and perform. Welcome to Still Evolving. One of the things I commonly remind people in my work is that every problem was once a solution. The patterns that we wrestle with now were rarely showing up as flaws in the beginning. They showed up as something useful, something that worked, something that got us through the season we were in at that time. Perfectionism is one of the clearest examples of this. For the perfectionist, the high standards and the pursuit of excellence were not only adaptive at one point, but they were genuinely rewarding. They produced results, earned recognition, and reinforced the identity built around getting it right. The question I want us to sit with today is what happens when those same patterns meet pressure or stress. Under those conditions, we tend to double down on what is most familiar. And for the high achiever, what is most familiar is the very pattern that has quietly stopped serving us. And that is the trap. There is an important distinction worth naming early in this conversation. High standards and the pursuit of excellence, when they remain flexible and adaptive, are not the problem. They are part of how meaningful work is done. That orientation looks fundamentally different from the static nature of perfection, which insists on a fixed outcome regardless of context, demands certainty before action, and treats anything short of flawless as failure. So what gives, and how does this happen to capable people by every external measure have built impressive careers and lives? First, we have to acknowledge that this pattern was not always a liability. It likely helped us early on in the pursuits that asked us to outwork the room, the GPA, the class ranking, and the early career wins. And for some of us, the recognition or approval that was felt tied to how flawlessly we performed. That pattern delivered, which is why it is so hard to question it now. But what got you here won't keep you here. The demands of leadership, of building, of guiding other people through complexity and uncertainty ask for something different than what got you to the door. They ask for clarity over control, momentum over polish, and the willingness to move while the picture is still incomplete. That is the territory we are stepping into today. I'm genuinely excited to be joined by Brittany Greenfield for this conversation. Brittany is founder and CEO and a cybersecurity leader who has spent her career inside the kind of high-stakes environments where speed matters and perfection quietly kills momentum. Her work helps founders, operators, and executives stop confusing excellence with endless effort, and her good enough framework is one of the most practical answers I have come across to the very trap that we are about to unpack. Please welcome Brittany to Still Evolving. Brittany, hi, and welcome to Still Evolving. I am grateful for the opportunity to have this conversation with you today. Very excited.
So thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me, Dr. Amy.
So we wanted to dive into a little bit more about one of those lovely traps that many of us high performers can find ourselves in a downward spiral in, and that's perfectionism. I know you've done a lot of work in talking about that in your leadership journey, your professional journey, but also wanted to kind of give you some time to share with us kind of when we think about leadership blind spots, where did you first notice perfectionism popping up for you as a leader?
It's, I always joke, my framework should be called do as I say, not as I did. It really came out for me as part of my entrepreneurial journey. My background has been pursuing new market strategies for enterprise software companies, but then I got into the high stress situation of founding a company for myself. And I think as leaders, we all know when we're under stress, that's when our worst tendencies come out. And for me, that's perfectionism. I don't think I'm alone for the folks listening here today. And, it felt that I had to control everything, that nothing was good enough to be delivered. And it was slowing me down. I realized that I was missing out on capital opportunities because the investor wasn't just right, or I didn't have the deck perfect to get out there. I realized it was trickling down onto my team because I expected a certain level of perfection, or even worse, I wasn't defining the standard because I was so caught up in myself. And that's when I started to realize, funny enough, in talking to other founders, one of the things you don't realize as a founder is you become a coach for other founders and then eventually other leaders and whatnot. And, this is why I joke, do as I say, not as I did. I went, here's the lesson I learned that slowed me down, that kept me from building momentum. Don't repeat this. And that's really where I realized perfection and this notion of not being good enough was getting in my way of making progress.
Absolutely. It sounds as if certainly you can have that balance of still maintaining a high standard or pursuit of excellence without falling into that trap that becomes more debilitating or really causes you and your team to become stuck, right? And missing out on so many of those opportunities.
Exactly. I think there's three things on that. One, perfection isn't a standard, it's a myth. There's no such thing as the perfect deliverable, perfect scenario. It's much better to get something done that isn't perfect and get it out there so you can start to iterate on it than wait for this magical moment, because you're going to be sitting around forever if you're waiting for the magical moment of perfection. The second is, you're right. It's not about lowering your standards. It's about understanding what the standard is for that moment. Board decks. It's a really easy place for any leader to get caught up. And I can't tell you how many board members, not just of my own, of other companies, ranging from startups to publicly traded companies, they go, please just send me the slides in advance. We know there will be changes, but I'd much rather have the time to read the slides, even if there are iterations afterwards, than be reading them at midnight before I'm supposed to show up at 8 a.m. I was literally talking to a board member for not my board, thank God, I've learned my lesson last night. And he goes, I just had to call the CEO and say, send me the slides because I have to see you at 8 a.m., right? That's a CEO caught up in a perfectionist tendency. And, I think that's where our work starts to, so understanding the context of your stakeholders allows you to say, this is what the standard is. This is what done is in this moment, even if I have to come back and do a second iteration. And then the third is obviously it leaks out into other people. I think that, and it impacts trust. It impacts trust on your stakeholders or your employees, and then it starts to drive burnout as well, because if you're just sitting around waiting for this perfect moment, you'll never get there, and you're going to just wear down on yourself, as you were mentioning before.
Absolutely. I mean, if you come back to the condition in which we are living and working is a dynamic one. It's and right now it feels sometimes very fast paced and ever changing, but the human system, like us as beings, we are dynamic as well. We're ever changing, ever evolving. I mean, literally the cells in our body are not the same as years ago.
No.
And if you think of perfectionism, that ultimately becomes static.
Right.
It's not changing.
Correct.
Right. So then where the hell do you go? Right. If that's what you're trying to achieve, it's a complete disconnect from who we are as humans, as well as where we are living and working within this very dynamic condition. I was reminded,
right.
Sorry, I was reminded, I had a mentor one time, and in grad school is where this really came out for me. My undergraduate pursuit, my athletic pursuit, it didn't pop up and kind of rear its ugly head as much, right? In my graduate training, I think I finally found that lane where I was like, hey, this is for me.
Right.
I finally found that lane where I had to work, I had to grind, and yet it was not only fulfilling, I knew I could be good at this, right? And as soon as all of that collided, that's where the perfectionism piece for me reared its ugly head. And I had a mentor. I was just, I laugh at this now. No one asked me, what's your GPA for your doctorate degree?
Right.
Like, nobody gives a shit.
Right,
like,
exactly.
you have a doctorate degree.
Grad school is like, did you make it through or not?
Exactly. Who cares, right? Well, I had a professor for a class that really wasn't my niche kind of area. It was developmental psychology. Just wasn't my passion field. And it was her first semester teaching. She was a recent doctoral grad herself. Right. It was her first semester teaching as full-time faculty. And I got an A-. And I was pissed. I just remember this. I was like enraged that I earned, and truly I earned the A-. And my mentor was like, are you serious right now? Like, seriously. He was like, you realize there is a concept of like being good enough. And sometimes in life, for whatever you're working on, a B is okay, Amy. Like, and to your point about understand the context, understand that there's ultimately many needs and goals in whatever you're offering or delivering or creating. And most commonly, most often, like having something kind of really tightened up. Yeah. It's not the prioritized need in the moment.
Completely agree. Look, there's a reason it came out for you when you were in grad school. There's a reason it comes out for people as they climb the ladder of their jobs, or, like I said, for me, when I went to go found my own company. And so we see 70% of leaders identify as being perfectionists, right? There's at least the self-awareness. And it's because by the time you get to where you are, the stakes feel so high. Things aren't showing up on your desk or in your classroom or whatnot because they're easy by that point in time. It's because they're hard, because you are good enough. And, I think one of the things you talk about the A-. We've been lied to about the grading system. In the real world, we are not graded. It's a little more of a check plus, check minus. And I'll tell a story from my grad school. First weekend, get in, and there's basically a hazing case. The TAs from the previous year say something to your study group like, don't spend more than 17 hours on this. And, you have a bunch of overachievers ready to show that they're best in the class because we all showed up in that classroom because we were best in our work environments, our classrooms or whatever. And so we go and, some teams are locked in the school for the weekend. My team did a little bit differently, and I'll share that. But the lesson was that we went out and we all submitted our homework, and we get it back the next day. And we're like, how the hell did we get this back the next day? Check plus, check minus. Could you prove your assumptions? Did you put the work in? And did you not make any critical errors? That was it. And the lesson had nothing to do with the case. It was about whether or not we shipped a part to a plane or just canceled the flight. It had nothing to do with that. And what my class did, and was really my first time thinking about the importance of delegation, was we broke down our skill sets, which, believe it or not, the school had kind of already done by putting us together, broke down our skill sets and assigned different jobs to different people based off of their skill sets. I was never going to be the statistician, so we left it to the consultant. We only spent maybe 5 hours working on it, where our classmates spent 20 hours working on it. I think this is an important thing that I talked about, the impact that perfection doesn't just have on you, waiting for that moment to get it out and not building momentum. It has on your team. 30% of managers say they're bad at delegating. And flip side is, these perfectionists are smart, and they know that I think it's 33% increased revenue when you delegate better. And that's right. You know, so this is the constant tug of perfectionism to say, oh, well, I have to do it perfectly. Therefore, I think it's people are almost trying to be benevolent and not pass it on to somebody else or share the pain. But if you just delegate for what maybe your strengths aren't, because that's really why we're hiring, right? If I could do it all, I would, but I shouldn't.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a real hard ROI on being willing to delegate for those perfectionists that can't get out of their own way.
Totally. You know, I remember, you know, when I started at Athey Performance early on, you're like, you're lean, you know, you're like bootstrapping everything, right? And in today's, you know, the access to tools to help you do some of those things when it's really not your core competency, they're available, right? Like Canva's out there, you know, and there is oftentimes the practical constraint of having to kind of stretch beyond like your core when you're an early startup founder and you're trying to get things done. But there will become a time as you are growing the business where, and this was probably, I share this with people, that just because you can does not mean you should.
I say it all the time too.
And I look back and I'm like, I can look back and honestly tell you, I was executing some things during a time where I had to. That's what I needed. And then there was a critical period where when we talk about growth and we talk about how we can build and iterate more efficiently, there was a critical period that probably there was a lag.
Right.
There was a lag, and there was a number of reasons for my hesitancy to let something go. And I think, you know, it's really helpful to kind of check ourselves and ask the question, what is going on that I'm really holding on to this right now? And for like, to your point, oftentimes it is this need to control and be right. That perfectionistic tendency. Brittany, I wanted to ask you, we were talking about this delegation skill. I know you use a skill leverage risk matrix. Can you share more about that and how that's helped you in your leadership journey in delegating, knowing what to keep, what to let go?
Yeah. So look, my story is similar to yours. The best advice I got when I was first founding my company was you have to think about the business as a bunch of boxes. And when you first start, you're one box. You're a box of one. So you do have to do everything. You don't have a choice to do it. But you have to start thinking about when those boxes are going to start to split. So it starts to become front of house, back of house. And then you maybe start to get specialized functions. And it's really important to check yourself because like you, it wasn't just the driver of perfection. I am so afraid of getting it wrong that I've got to micromanage it, even if I might not. And I'm not a micromanager, but I may not be the best person. Should I be doing accounting? Absolutely not. And that's where I came up with the skills leverage risk matrix. Apologies for my dog barking.
It's all good.
I have no idea what she's barking at. And,
she's contributing. She's contributing.
She's like, yeah, skills leverage risk matrix. And that's where I came up with that to check myself. And then I started introducing it to other leaders because it was a great opportunity. Sorry, Max. Stop. Thank you. Talking about being willing to be okay with imperfection. And it was a great opportunity to check myself. So what we have people do. Okay. Sorry, production.
Girls, we can say hi to production. Exactly. It's all good.
Go on. We're now uninvited. Sorry about that. So let me come back to a cleaner point. So, that's where I came up with the skills leverage risk matrix as a way for leaders to check themselves, not just about where they should be spending their time, but also how much to invest their time in. I talked about the fact that we need to remember the world is not an A to F scale. So the first thing you do, you need to look at the core functions that you're responsible for. And this is going to change over time, whether as a function of your leadership position or your business growing. And you go and you just be honest, rate yourself across them. Are you a check plus, a check minus? I love the Canva example. I am a check in marketing, right? Right? I get it enough.
Right.
And then you have to go look at how much leverage, which is really, if you want to think about leverage, leverage is how much value does you spending your time on this actually contribute to your momentum, to the growth of the business. And so marketing, as an example, me spending my time, especially in this day and age on marketing, is actually a low one, right? Because there's a lot of great, easy ways to do it. And then you have to think about the investment, and that's the risk. So how much money are you actually going to spend on this? Are you going to outsource it to AI, or are you going to go get a real qualified professional? For me, that was writing code. I'm a technical person, but I do not write code. So when it came time to build out my engineering team, I had to go invest in the right CTO for my business. Meanwhile, when it came to doing accounting, well, getting it done was better than having the world's best CFO, because I didn't need financial strategy. My financial strategy was keep lights on, go make money, right? Yeah, so I just, outsourcing it to a bookkeeper was perfect. And then marketing, ChatGPT and Canva, fantastic. Right? For $20 a month, I've got a full marketing team. And, that's how you have to start applying that. And I think the matrix, like I said, I used it on myself, sometimes not often enough, is just a way to get out of your own head to say, this isn't valuable for me to be spending my time on because it's not going to move the needle.
Mm-hmm. No, I love that. It helps us, I think I may have said to you offline, like I can nerd out and talk about these concepts probably more than like my partner appreciates at times. But also oftentimes people are like, yeah, but how can I use this? How can I really apply this in my life? And I really appreciate kind of just breaking out, considering those skills, considering the leverage and that risk, that investment. So super helpful. You mentioned earlier the cascading effects that perfectionism trap can have. And you mentioned on the team, but one of the things you also talked about is the impact on our ability to sustain the grind, to sustain sustain with that effort without breaking down. I'm curious in your journey where you found kind of the correlative effect, if you will, of that perfectionism trap and then neglecting recovery that perhaps maybe led you to run into the wall. Like, what were some of those early signs in your journey?
I think one of them was the fact that I felt I had to do it all. But how that translated itself was I wasn't doing the things that brought me joy. And simple, right? In the early days, as you know from starting a business, it's batten down the hatches, all resources have to go in. And so I wasn't doing simple things like having friends over and cooking. I still had to eat, right? Right. That wasn't I went all of mine, and there's a recent trend now in new founders, and I'm blanking on the name of it, but it's like the 70-hour method. It came out of China, and China outlawed it, which tells you something. If China outlawed this, and so you're seeing founders talk about, well, I work 9 hours a day, 6 days a week, and I only take a break for an ice bath. What? That is not sustainable. And we're creating this culture out there, especially with the highlight reels, that when you're already a perfectionist, you don't need encouragement to go do that, right? Yeah. Your brain is going constantly. And I ran into it because, look, when you don't give yourself that recovery time, you're going to hit burnout and you're going to stop being effective for your team at the end of the day. And even if you are still a team of one in that moment, you're still a team. You're your own stakeholder. And, I think this is such a pertinent conversation right now for all leaders, not just because of COVID, but just ongoing overstimulation. We're seeing increased record reported numbers of stress and burnout. In 2025, 71% of leaders reported increased stress, and that was up from 63% just the year before. So it's one of these things we need to start to remember how we actually set up boundaries for ourselves. For me, it's keeping my phone on Do Not Disturb until 9 a.m., right? And not letting it be next to my bed, because What was I waking up to? Not just as a founder, but in previous roles, 1,000 text messages. And I think in this day and age of being everywhere all at once, it's up to us as effective leaders to set up those boundaries so that we don't hit burnout. And that burnout gets caused by two things. One, overstimulation, and two, not taking the time to feed our brains, right? Do the things that create virtuous cycles. I say, leadership and entrepreneurship is where overachievers go to fail 99% of the time. And therefore you have to make sure you take those small wins along the way. And that small win could be as simple as, I made time for a run today because that gave me the space on it.
Absolutely. I think one of the, I've worked in elite sport. I've worked certainly with special forces and now in private industry with teams. I have experienced kind of a similar point in the evolution of this. So in sport, we learned, especially going back to like a comprehensive sports science model that was over in Eastern Europe, we learned early on that there was a number of factors, over 45 factors, that impact one's ability to perform at a high level, to optimize their performance. In the early 2000s, really what you saw come on the scene in elite sport is the focus of recovery as a performance mindset. Yep. We know sleep is the number one performance enhancer. So what shifted? Why all of a sudden are elite sport organizations investing in recovery technologies, whether that's sleep pods, whether that's sleep monitoring devices, whether that's taking a look and investing more in recovery stations with appropriate fueling, snacks, supplementation? Well, it's because the data is damn clear. Right. When we talk about optimizing performance, it is the human system that is actually having to maybe jump out of a plane, shoot that last minute shot, or show up ready to be able to think clearly, act decisively, in these cognitive performance domains. So now that I'm predominantly working in private industry with corporate leaders and teams, I see a similar shift, It wasn't that it wasn't touched on, they would be the stress management program, but it was somewhat similar to what we saw in higher ed when all of a sudden we're having a stress management workshop the week of finals. I'm kind of like, dude, that's really, I applaud the effort, certainly on message, but we're missing something here. Now, when we take a look at it in private industry, we're starting to see more and more of this conversation happen around what are some tools and foundations needed so that we can show up not in just one moment that matters, but moments that matter over time and be able to sustain that. And the impact of being under recovered, where we are not renewing the system that is needed to show up, is great. And then that, like you said, the statistics are pretty clear, whether it's reported stress levels, whether it's burnout, what have you. The data is pretty clear on the impact of that. So I very much appreciate the shifting, the evolution, and recognition of the need to recover in order to optimize that performance. So to wrap up, I'm curious, Brittany, I like leaving with our guests kind of that tool takeaway. So what is that one immediate actionable strategy, something that people perhaps could go out and do today, and then easily integrate into their routines? It doesn't have to be, I got to figure out where I'm going to take a week's vacation. That's not what we're talking about. But what's that immediate actionable takeaway that you have found helpful and being able perhaps to keep from getting drawn into that perfectionism trap, or even be able to sustain high performance over time?
Look, I alluded to this before, and this fits exactly with the recovery, right? You got to take what I call intellectual playtime, right? There is no framework for this other than go out and do it. I think, from a corporate culture perspective, we're more familiar with this as Google's 20% rule. Well, go spend 20% of your week on some kind of passion project. It doesn't have to be a project. It just needs to be something different than what you are working on. And, this is because it starts to activate different parts of your brain. There's a reason there's the phrase, go sleep on it, right? Your brain needs time to ingest information and process it. The other side of intellectual playtime, though, is that it starts to actually turn the wheel on innovation. It allows you to have preparation, incubation, bring greater illumination to whatever you might be working on at work, or maybe it's a problem at home. And when you allow yourself that intellectual playtime, it doesn't have to be big. You get that percolation in the background, and it keeps you more adaptable. It could be, by the way, I'm the first to say, if you want 45 minutes, if you want 45 minutes looking at people.com, that's great. If that's what your body needs for that moment. But when it's unstructured and purely curiosity driven, it keeps you much more resilient. It keeps your brain resilient. It keeps it developing those new neural pathways that we will use in the future, even if in the moment it doesn't feel quite applicable. And I think if you want the tactical component of that, I call it, the 45-minute rule. You have to time box yourself. This is how you're going to make time for the intellectual playtime. And, I'm going to come full circle on our conversation to say the way that you say that you get more dones done is by saying, I'm going to figure out what I can accomplish for this in 45 minutes. And I'm going to set the standard of what done is at the end of 45 minutes. And then at the end of 45 minutes, I'm going to say, do I need another iteration, or can I actually ship this? And that's how you start to develop that discipline component. I know it's a little paradoxical. Have discipline so you can have no discipline and you can go play. But, that's how you start to free up that time. That's how you start to stop being constantly on alert and going, oh my God, what's going on my phone, right? I've got to respond to my Slack message. And you keep, we can't, this was your point before, we can't do our jobs if we don't keep our brains healthy. And I just love that the research is out there and people are investing in understanding what keeps their workforces happy. Because at the end of the day, that's how we drive productivity and momentum and growth, not just for organizations, but for our people.
I love it. Brittany, thank you so much. I have thoroughly enjoyed the conversation and a ton of takeaways here for our audience. So thank you, and look forward to many more.
Likewise.